The Gemara in Avodah Zarah further, on this same idea, the Talmud says that the Gemara there starts to talk about describing what are called love idols, sex toys. It's in the Talmud. In fact, it even talks about a queen of Israel who owned several different types of sex toys. Again, not as a compliment, as a sad state of being, because love can come to sickness. The Gemara in Chulin says, although most husbands would like to assume that all of the intimacies that their wives have are with them, the Talmud says that it's at least safe to say that the majority of intimacies with one's wife is with them. So, and on that I conclude on this section of the other Gemara in Chulin, where the Gemara there says that the Talmud points out that at the end of the day, despite all that can be said and done, there is no protection against immorality. And therefore, what is the point? That it's all about fear of God. It's the only door, it's the only avenue. It's not about getting caught. It's not about, can I get away with it? It's all about, why are you alive? And when we realize there's only one reason we are alive, and that is to become ourselves and to stand before God as the person that God wished us to be, that is our goal. And therefore, we don't need to have these protections. I mean, obviously we do in many levels and so on. But at the end of the day, the ultimate protection is going to be about our awareness. So now what do we need to be aware of? We're going to go into the next section, dating. So the Baal Shem Tov starts off with a beautiful thing, which we all know on Friday nights. We say, Eshet Chal Mi Yimtza. And the Baal Shem points out that the word mi, that's the Hebrew mem yud, not W-H-O. Mi is God's name. One of the reasons, because the gematria of the word mi is 50, relating to the 50th gate of wisdom. So the Baal Shem learns it. Eshes Chayil, Hashem will find for you. When will Hashem find the Eshes Chayil for you? Only when you find yourself. Now we're going to go through that as we come into the aspects of dating. So the Gemara has there's actually quite a few times, not quite, but there's several times in the Talmud where Rebbe Meir Baal HaNes encountered Cleopatra and had all these very fascinating conversations with her. And of course, one of them, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is Cleopatra said, okay, good, God did this awesome job of creating the world. What is he doing now? And he says, he's making shidduchim. God's the actual ultimate shotgun, double barrel. So God's making shidduchim, right? So she said, well, there's no big deal in that. She calls in 50 male slaves and 50 women slaves. Yo, you. See, voila, they're all married. They come in the next day. This one has a black eye. She has a broken arm. This one's missing teeth. Right? Not so simple to make shidduchim. She came to appreciate that's what Rebbe Meir, that the amazing awesomeness of how God has to manipulate to bring shidduchim. This is why the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, also says in the Gemara in Sota, it says that two things, one's livelihood and one's marital relationships, which are actually in themselves deeply connected, but we're not going to do that now. But this is Kashik Kriyat Yam Suf, as difficult as splitting the Red Sea. And one of the ideas of splitting the Red Sea is that, reminds me when I think the first joke I ever learned as a kid was, what happens when you throw a white hat into the Red Sea? It comes out wet. Anyhow, I was like 5. So the idea of the Red Sea is that it was God will lift apart the laws of nature to bring together a man and a woman. Now, I'm going to steal from the next section, but I'm going to bring it here because it's really important. This idea of Besher. You know, this idea of my soulmate. And I once knew a guy, ironically he's dead, and he said to me once, he says, you know, my Besher hasn't been born and her mother already died. So, yeah, our friends nicknamed him Lucky. Right? But this idea of Besher, so the Gemara Sota says that a person's first husband, wife, whichever direction you're coming from, is their soulmate, and their second husband, wife, is according to what they merit. Now, personally, I've been married like 112 times, I think. I lost count. But what happens to King Solomon, who's been married 700 times?
700?
Yeah, the other 300 were Pelagish. Mm-hmm. It was engaged in activities with 1,700 of which were wives. So, what about that? I mean, maybe that's like the Marshondering, you know, like the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one, the seventh one. So, 100 barrels of wives on the wall. How do you possibly relate to this idea? The Gemara only says number 1, number 2. So here's a very beautiful idea. It doesn't mean 1, 2 chronologically. It means primary and secondary, what we call in the laws of kashrut, ikr and tafel. That which is the essence and that which is secondary to the essence. So therefore, many times, if we haven't really worked on ourselves correctly, we will get married with somebody according to our lefi maasim, according to our actions or what we deserve, only in order to help, like a chiropractor, put our soul back in its proper place, so that now we will be able to meet our b'sher, our soul mate. And so therefore, sometimes people might have to go through hundreds of relationships. In fact, it says by Rabbi Yoel, Zechron Bracha, the Satmar Rebbe, he would, normally in their world, you only have to pay the finder's fee, sorry, business term, you only have to pay the shotgun fee if you actually get engaged. And he would pay every person for each date, even though he never got engaged to these women. He would date over 100 people. Satmar Rav. And so they asked him, what's going on? He said, the Gemara says that when a baby's in its mommy, and it's 40 days into its development, a voice comes out and says, so-and-so to so-and-so. But what's really going on? Like, open up the lens and let's really look at what's happening there. He says that God holds up this little neshama and says, Sarah Rivka, or Yankee, right? Who gets to marry who? And all the angels start yelling out ideas. And only when the angel hears, God hears the right one, boom, down comes the gravel and says, so-and-so to so-and-so. So the Gemara only gives us the ending. It doesn't really give us the whole story. So the Satmar Rav said, every single woman I went out with, I had like a puzzle. I had to find a piece here of her, a piece here of her, like that game concentration. How many do you have to turn over until you know what the picture is? And then, poof, now I see who she is. He says, otherwise I would have never recognized her, or vice versa. I would have never recognized him. And he goes on to say further, it doesn't even need to be a date. It could be your mother, it could be your sister, it could be your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it should be. All these encounters with members of the opposite species are really about learning in reflections of ourselves as to who we are. So take this a little bit deeper. Rav Ginsburg says a very interesting thing. He brings down, there's a very famous Gemara that says, Matzah Isha, Matzah Tov, right? Or Matzah Ani, Isha Rami Mavet. So there are two quotes from King Solomon. One of them is basically, I found a woman I found good. Obviously you can just substitute woman, husband, same thing. Or it says, I found the woman to be more bitter than death. Marmi Mavet, sorry, that was the lashon. More bitter than death. So he explains, what's the difference between these two? I mean, they're actually completely contradictory. So how do you understand which is relevant for which? He says as follows. In the verse that says, I found the woman more bitter than death, the first word is I. I found. When I'm going on shidduchim, who am I looking for? Me. I. It's all about me. So therefore, if the woman I marry or the man I marry is all about what will she do for me, or God forbid, thinking that I could live a life of problems and just jump into a marriage and bing, Shangri-La. It's more like La La Land. But when you go through that, if it's all about me, then that'll never work. Because guess what? A woman's also human. She also has a life. She also has feelings. She also has dreams and goals and desires. And so does the man. So if it's all about me, I'll never see that person. Right? Ezer Kenegdo. Rashi says either she's going to help me or she's going to be against me. When is she against me? When I'm only about me. But if you look at the other pasuk, it says, Matzah Isha Matzah Tov. I found the woman. I went out looking to see who is she. As we talked about before, intimacy. I wanted to know this person. I wanted to really find who this person is. Now the irony of it is, we never know who another person is until after we're married. And then sometimes it's too late or too scary. But the truth of the matter is, if you go into a relationship about giving rather than about receiving, then the chances are, no matter what all of those extraneous personality issues are, you can at some point, the two pure neshamas can find each other. And when they find each other, everything like concentric circles can begin to grow and to grow and to grow and to grow until there's real love. The love which comes through hard work. Not the Hollywood, they fell in love, but rather the Jewish, they grew in love because they worked about giving to each other, about each one seeing what can they do. In fact, it's a very beautiful Torah. At the bris, people always say, Mazel Tov, Kein Nichnas LeBris. 3 things pop up. Well, obviously for the boy. So the first is Torah. Why? Next, Tachana on the Rekevet is the bar mitzvah. And then after that is Chuppah, married. And then the last thing is Ma'asim Tovim, doing good deeds. Why? He can't do good deeds at 9 years old? He has to wait till he's married to first do good deeds? Haha, Boker Tov. The only good deeds you will ever really do is when you're married. Because the rest of life is simply about playing I am Oz. But when you go back at the end of the day and pull back the curtain and all you are is a professor from Kansas, and you're with your wife, or you're with your husband, who knows who you really are, and there's love there, and you do kindness there, or you have a fight there. I remember the Amshina Rebbe once told me, he said, the problem with Bali Tshuva is you don't know how to fight al pi halacha with your wife. Right? So you fight, of course you fight. That's not the problem. Fighting is not the problem. The problem is how long do you hold the grudge? How quickly do you hurdle it? Or how much do you grow in the future where you don't fight at that point anymore? So the real Ma'asim Tovim, that's after the chuppah. That's where you live with somebody who really knows you for who you are. And if you could grow there, then in fact you can grow everywhere. By the way, I will just tell you one more thing though, because I kind of, this is sort of, a Talmud for me is absolutely the ultimate brilliance of life. And that's only the beginning point. So on that same pasuk though, there's an amazing Gemara in Sanhedrin, I'll just read it. When the Talmud explains this pasuk from King Solomon, who wrote, I found the woman to be more bitter than death. Oh, sorry, another pasuk. I found more bitter than death the woman with a heart filled with nets and traps. Okay, none of us ever met a woman like that, of course. But the Gemara says that it was Reb Yehuda ben Reb Yitzchak who said to the rabbi who was quoting this, what kind of woman is this? And he said to his father, rather, he says, what kind of woman is this? And the father said back, like your mother. Here's this Gemara. And then the Gemara says, however, on her behalf, the Talmud quickly adds that while it was true that she was quick-tempered, she was also very easily appeased with a kind word. But what I love about this is, we airbrush our rabbis. That's what happens. We turn them into saints. We're Jews. We're not into saints. A tzaddik is not a saint. A tzaddik falls 7 times. What kind of tzaddik saint is that? But he gets up 8 times. That's why he's a tzaddik. Because he's a human being. That's what a tzaddik is. Not like, ooh, but a real person who fails and brushes it off and gets up and does tshuva and grows. And fails again. And gets up again and does tshuva and grows. That's a tzaddik. That he's always, or she is always going letzad kedusha. Every time there's free will, push it letzad kedusha. Tzad kuf, tzaddik. And the opposite of that is amalek. Amel kuf. The same kuf which can mean holiness could also mean monkey. Amel kuf is the mischievous monkey. This is amalek. So the free will, bechira chavshi, is to be a moron or to be a thinking human being. The moron is lost in dreamland, loses their life. The thinking human being is willing to take chances and to grow. My mother used to have a poster on our kitchen, and it was a picture of a turtle. And the text read, even a turtle has to stick out its neck to go forward. This is what we need to have in our choices of life. So I just tell you one more thing about classical modern shidduchim. And look, I'm not making fun of anyone, just a few people, but not everyone. But the shidduch thing is very important, and it works, sometimes. Other people jump off the cliff. But for a lot of people it works, and look, what are you going to do? You have to come up with certain rules, guidelines. I mean, how can you, right? You can't really take time to truly know a person and really sincerely, oh, yes you can. Anyhow, so I remember when I was going through shidduchim after, I think it was my 15th divorce, so somebody said, I got a perfect woman for you. Yeah, really? Tell me about it. Well, she's divorced. It's like mamish b'shit, you're both divorced. Okay, like what? Hello? Tell me anything else? What else do you need to know? Where do I sign? Okay, but the point is, like, you know, when you have all of these resume shidduchim, yeah, well, he's in the Mir Yeshiva now 4 years. Of course he's in the Mir Yeshiva. It's the only way he's going to get a date to marry you in the Mir Yeshiva. But go in the Mir Yeshiva and open the Tosfos and see how he explains it. Yeah. Okay, anyhow, so you have all these kind of like resume kind of things. Here's a resume. I got a shit up for you. Okay? Great guy, redhead. Great guy. He's a poet. He's powerful. He's dynamic. And so on. We're just not sure if he's really a legitimate child or not, you know? And it kind of runs in the family. There was something about father-daughter, like way back in the Yichus and so on. And of course, this is King David. Ooh.
Never get a date today.
Exactly. Right, so, but this is the kind of things we have to realize. We have to be able to, in the world of Shidduchim, well, we have to play the rules and all the rest of it. But when you're on the battlefield, and you're meeting the person face to face, really meet the person. Know the person. And the only way you can do that is if you know yourself, because that's what it will reflect. So let's go to some specifics in the Gemara of suggestions for what to look for on Shidduchim from the Talmud. The Gemara in Kedushin says, obviously, a person is not allowed to marry a woman unless if he has not seen her. Now we know halachically that's all about under the veil for a minute or a second, if even. But that's not really what the Gemara means. Although it does mean that halachically, it means much more than that. Until he has seen her. Until he really understands that there's something special here that they share. We're not talking about Hollywood romance of love. We're talking about conscious awareness, which every person can achieve. The Gemara says, don't marry off your daughter unless she says, I want to marry him. Which is kind of an interesting thing, maybe not so applicable for our circles per se, but it's really an important thing. What do you mean you don't want to? You're just a kid. What do you know? What are your parents? We know so much better than you. Don't listen to that. Born alone, die alone, be alone, live alone, but be yourself. The Gemara goes further, it says, if a woman is asking about her potential date, has he learned Torah? Right? Is he a Yeshiva Bacher? Or she says, is he a Talmud Chacham? This is what I love about the Gemara. The Gemara says, and she makes that as a condition in order to accept a proposal for marriage. If he says yes, the Gemara wants to know, how much Torah has he have to have learned in order for him to be telling the truth? I mean, this is the classic example why God spared us Christmas. You know? Because we would just be like all over it, totally nuts, right? What's called flickering light, and how far does the present have to be under the tree? What is it Ruva Kakulo? What if you don't have a chimney? What if you're allergic to eggnog? I mean, like, we would just like be all over this religion, so God kind of spared us. So the same thing here, right? You know, well, how many daf did you actually learn to be called a Talmud Chacham? Now the beauty, I track, one of the things I love to do is track in Shas the term Talmud Chacham. And the thing I came up with, which is that I love, is Talmud Chacham, I have to tell you a personal story. So once upon a time in my Nouveau Baal Tshuva experience of, wow, so I went to this Rav and I wanted to put on a long black coat. Yes, there was a period in my time, somebody could testify, where I used to wear a strime, I had long payas and a long beard. I'm just kidding. Anyhow, so I wanted to put on this long coat, and I came to this Rav and he said, you can't put it on until you're a Talmud Chacham. So appropriate to this Gemara. Okay. So then I went to my Hasidic Rav, and I didn't ask because you're not allowed to play that game, although we always did, because you kind of knew like what rabbi to ask what question to. Anyhow, so I went to this Rav, and I mentioned to him what this rabbi is. He said, are you kidding? If that's what you're going to listen to, then the day you put on your long coat, you are an egomaniac. That's ga'ava. Oh, I am now a Talmud Chacham. He says, you want to put on a long coat because that's what you think a Jew does? Put on a long coat. It doesn't matter how much you've learned or how much you haven't learned. So then the question really becomes, what is a Talmud Chacham? How much do you have to learn where, you are now, you know, my Get Taxi, I just got a taxi through it today on the app, and I just hit like the next level. I don't know what that means, but wow, I hit the next level. Right, so when do I hit that Talmud Chacham level? So here's a beautiful insight. Think about the words. A Talmud Chacham means a student of wisdom. That's all it means. If you love wisdom, if you desire wisdom, no matter how much you know, you want to know more, you're a Talmud Chacham. Doesn't matter if you're only reading English art scroll, who cares? Gemara itself says several times in Shas, it doesn't matter if you learn a lot or a little, insignificant. It matters that you learn to serve God with what you know. So if that's your focus, it doesn't matter to impress me. I remember, unfortunately, because I was one of the first Korban Talmidim at the yeshiva back in the 70s. And, in those days, you had to keep like a certain act. God forbid you should be seen in the Beit Midrash with an English Hebrew book. Oh, putz, right? So even if you didn't understand what you had in your hand, it didn't matter. Hey, look, I'm walking on the Chush and Mishpat. See that? Right? So this is horrible. It's really, who are you fooling? You're only fooling yourself. So therefore, it's really about learning to love wisdom. Once you learn love wisdom, it's just about growing and being in that wisdom. Okay, a little bit more practical advice. The Gemara says, who is called the poor, evil schemer? This is one who keeps his daughter from getting married. Before marrying a woman, now we're going to flip to the man's side, be very careful to check out her brothers, because the chances are that your children will be more similar to her brothers than to your brothers. And who do we know that from? Judaism for 20. Who? Yes, bing, we got a winner. Exactly, from Lavan. This is why Rivka was more hip to Esav than Yitzchak was. Because Yitzchak saw it like, okay, they saw the relationship, but Rivka knew that her brother Lavan, that's why she immediately was able to identify Esav. That is correct. Give that man a prize. That was the answer, because that is exactly where we learned that from. Going a little bit further here, this is kind of cute. The Gemara gives advice to matchmakers. The Gemara says that Yov, I think in English you call him Job, right?
Job.
Right, Steve Jobs, right. So it says that Steve would go around to widows to find them husbands. But how would he do it? He would go as if he was interested in marrying them. He'd take them out on a date. He would sort of inquire about them. And as soon as everybody said, whoa, look at that girl or lady that he's checking out, and they would sneak in quickly and marry her. And I know a true story about this. There was an amazing Makubal known as the Ribnitzer Rebbe. I don't know if you are familiar with this name. Bravo. So if you might remember, when the Ribnitzer was old and he was already in Muncie, he needed to find a wife and marry a very young divorced woman that nobody else was interested in. And why? Well, he was an old man. Why? Because he knew that the moment he would die, which wasn't going to be that much longer, everyone would rush to marry her. He did it in order to bring this honor and kavod. And I'll tell you another interesting thing. There was a man who was very close to the Rebbe who was involved in bringing him out of Russia. Yes. All right. So, I used to work in real estate with Rabbi Tauber. In fact, my first job when I came to Muncie, I said, well, this is an interesting name, Muncie. So I made a big poster of the word Muncie, but I made the S into a dollar sign. Right? If you take S out of Muncie, you get money. And you got that S in there. He didn't quite like it, but we were good friends anyhow. So he told me this story. His ears heard the following story. He used to learn Kabbalah with the Ribnitzer Rebbe, and they would learn in the upstairs. And one day when they were learning, the Rebbe leaned over to the sefer that Rabbi Tauber was holding, and when he went to sit down, he missed the chair and fell on the floor. And of course, Rabbi Tauber jumped, and the Ribnitzer said, no, wait 1 minute. Obviously, if God put me on the floor, there's a reason. Phone call came in downstairs from Eretz Yisrael that his wife had just died. This is like the beginning of the Shiva. So he was there for the immediately. He saw an Onan, and of course he was there for the Shiva. He made the Shiva call. And then on the 6th day of the Shiva, the Gabbai calls Rabbi Tauber and says, the Rebbe has asked if you would please come to make a Shiva call. It's like, I made a Shiva call. It's like very, first of all, you don't want to invite people to make a Shiva call. But anyhow, the Rebbe says he went. So he gets up in the morning, runs to the house, and the minute he got there, the Rebbe had just gotten up from sitting Shiva. And so Rabbi Tauber apologized. I'm sorry, I got it right out, David I got it the first thing I possibly could. And the Rebbe says, no, this is perfect. I actually wanted you to be there the second I got up from Shiva. Why? He says, well, you know, Rabbi Tauber, you work with Bali Tshuva. And I thought that maybe you could help me find my next wife, which of course later wound up being that wife. So maybe help you find that wife. And like, you know, obviously what Rabbi Tauber was thinking in his mind, like, gosh, your wife, she isn't even like cold in the grave yet. And you want to find a new wife? He said, obviously he used different words, but he asked in a very polite way, what is that? And he says, because it says that it's lo tov for a man to be alone. That's the language of the Bible. Lo tov, for a man to be alone. Not a woman, a man. Right? Because a woman has no halakhic obligation to get married. We're going to get that in a few more minutes. But for a man, it's lo tov. And he said, you know, I don't want to be a lo tov in front of God even for a minute. Just a perspective. If it's about serving God and really serving and finding the opportunity to give and help to support a woman and build a home, that's just a little thought about matchmakers. So the Gemara Sanhedrin says, quote from the Sefer Ben Sira, which is interesting that the Gemara quotes it because often it has a lot of problems with that book. It says, a beautiful wife will double her husband's days of joy. The Gemara B'chorim, though, this I like a lot. Reish Lakish is my hero in Shas, or at least one of them. And Reish Lakish says, a tall man should not marry a tall woman because maybe their child will be like the mast of a ship. And then it says, a short man should not marry a short woman because maybe the child will be the size of a finger. So now we have a source for the parents of Tom Thumb. Right? And then the third one it says a man and a woman who are both either very light-skinned or dark-skinned should not marry so that their children will not have extremely light or dark skin. Reish Lakish, tachlis, down to ground, what to really look for in practical marriage. Okay, we have three more sections, but we're still, it's only 9:15. You have to leave, don't worry about it, it's okay.
No, I would never.
No, well, the 5 o'clock bus in the morning will still be there.
Definitely.
So now we're going to get to wedding. These are just, look, I got to tell you, what I have plucked from Shas is like not even the pluckings of the pluckings of the pluckings. There's so much endlessly there, obviously, but I've highlighted a few little here's and there's because I thought you might find them interesting. So now I'm going to show you some things, just little thoughts about the wedding itself or getting married. The Gemara Baba Basra said that in ancient Israel, i.e. Talmudic times, when a Jewish woman would go to the chuppah, she would not have her hair covered, but she would wear a veil over her eyes. The Gemara Nida says that God actually braided Chava's hair before bringing her to the chuppah to be married to Adam, which is just a beautiful, beautiful image of the love of God having made Chava, and obviously it's all metaphoric, but the idea of the braiding the hair and with the care and the concern like a father for his daughter and walking her to the chuppah of Gan Eden. The Gemara Sanhedrin makes it clear that a woman check this out. Ready for this? Breaking news. Judaism 101, straight from the Talmud. Of course, things have changed and we're no longer like those guys, but if we were, this is what they did. The Gemara says that if a married woman only covers her hair when she is out of her house, only that, she would still be called a righteous woman. The Gemara Chulin says, Talmud says that the groom's family should invest more money in the wedding than the bride's family. The Gemara in Korim brings the source, actually it's a beautiful Gemara, it brings the source of the husband putting his talus over him in the kala, which became more of a trend in the last 15, 20 years. It's actually a Talmudic source that he puts the talus over the two of them to indicate the marriage. And the Gemara Nida says it's sensitive that young brides can be afraid to go to the mikveh, which I think is very beautiful. Because, there's sometimes, God forbid, the sense of, well, you have to do it, it's the mitzvah and all of the rest. No, hello. You know what the mitzvah is? The mitzvah is be sensitive to another human being. We know that Rebbe suffered 14 years of horrible intestinal pain because a little lamb was running from the Kohen that was supposed to be shechted in the Beit HaMikdash, and he picked up the animal and gave it to the Kohen and said, you were created for this. And God says, no. Rachamav al kol masav. My mercy is on every one of my creatures. You don't have passion for that little animal? That little animal at this moment is terrified, and you're telling me what it's supposed to do? 14 years Rebbe suffered from intestinal pains because of that. So you have a woman, much way beyond a little running goat, who's afraid of intimacy. She's never been with a man before. It's her married night. She has fears. You're going to tell her what the halacha is? Or are you going to be sensitive to where she's at and understand that? Well, the rabbis of the Gemara were very sensitive to her as a person. So, speaking about sensitivity, let's move into the next subject, which is divorce. Of course, the interesting thing about divorce, everybody always loves to say, I'm not sure if it's a 101 Torah or not, but it could be like a 104. So if that is that in the order of the Talmud, the Gemara for divorce, Gittin, comes before the Gemara for Kedushin, marriage. And the classical reason is that God always sends the healing before the illness. Okay. However, there's something true to this. And the truth of it is that without the ability to get divorced, you really cannot get married. Because we make mistakes. And therefore, if a person is waiting for perfection, in the Marine Corps, which is the other side of my family, in the Marine Corps we have an expression which is that best is the enemy of good. That if you're going for best, well, hold on a minute, hello, you've got good. That's why it's called good, by the way, because it's good. So you're actually ignoring good to go for best. Shem of a bari adif. You have bari, avadai, right here of good. This is good. And you ignore that? So therefore, there has to be the ability to maybe realize, well, maybe it wasn't good. Even business, I mean, everything we do in our lives. I always say this to people, how do you make decisions? Nobody makes a decision on 100%. If everyone waited for 100%, this room would be empty. None of us would be born. But we go on the best that we can. We weigh it as good as we can. We make as intelligent a decision as we can. But at some point, I don't know if you ever remember that movie, Dr. Strangelove, with, what was the... what's that? Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers, yes. Thank you. I was trying to think more of the director-producer. But anyhow, the one who passed away. Anyhow, so if you remember the very end of it, they're flying the nuclear flyer into Russia, the radio's dead, the controls aren't working, so the captain has got the cowboy hat, he's sitting on top of the atomic bomb, trying to release and all of a sudden it works, but whoop, the bomb falls out, and he's on the bomb, so like the last scene is this guy, this captain of an Air Force plane, on a nuclear bomb with a cowboy hat going, woohoo! Well, I remember each time I got engaged, that's exactly the image. Now, at that point, there's nothing to do but woohoo! And just write it down. So that idea, however, is really important. So, because if the bomb it turns out to be a nuclear dud, so we have to have that ability for divorce. The Vilna Gaon says, the Gra, Rabbi Nachman points out that the biblical word for divorce is called kritot, or in Yiddish or Ashkenaz, krisis, which means to cut. He says because if you notice at the wedding, the woman walks around like a battery, like zinc, right? She walks around 7 times to make this electrical energy connection come alive. Now, all of a sudden, at the time of divorce, when you cut your nails, they don't hurt because it's dead skin. When you cut your finger, it really hurts because it's not dead skin. So the idea of the get is that it cuts between the man and the woman. If the relationship between them is dead, there's no pain. But sometimes what happens is, as the knife is coming down, there might still be some living tissue down there. So the get actually becomes a tool that could salvage the very last hope of the wedding, because all of a sudden there might be an ouch. And at that ouch, everyone, right, like an earthquake, a building collapse, you suddenly hear a voice in there, everyone clears away all the dead tissue, and there might still be life. If there's no life, it cuts right through. There's no pain. The Gra, the Vilna Gaon points out that the word get are the only 2 letters, something only the Gra could say. There are only 2 letters in all of Tanakh, either Gimel Tet or Tet Gimel, that never are next to each other. Not in a word, and not even the beginning and the end of another word. In other words, it is impossible for the Gimel and the Tet to be together. So that's why it represents the idea of get. There's much more involved in that in Kabbalah, because we know that the 3 and the 9, these have all kinds of relationships and so on, but that's, on the simple level, that's the idea of the get. The Gemara in Zvachim says, makes it clear, speaking of divorce, that divorce should never be a light thing. It says that women, wives, are not just simply waiting around to be divorced. That's the language of Zvachim. The Gemara Sanhedrin says, the Talmud says that the altar in Jerusalem cries when a person divorces his wife. I went to, unfortunately, I think it was the Tulner Rebbe, but I can't say for sure because I don't remember. I don't remember having breakfast this morning. But I went to a Makubal, a very big Rav in Geula. And I asked him a question based on this Gemara. Gemara says that every time, God forbid, people get divorced, the Mizbeach, the altar, cries. But we know that it's asur to be sad in Jerusalem. We know that in fact there were special booths that were outside the walls of Jerusalem that when you had to figure out your income tax, which would definitely depress you, you couldn't be in Jerusalem. You had to go out of the city if you want to be depressed. That's out of the city. So you couldn't be in Jerusalem depressed. You certainly couldn't be in the Beit HaMikdash depressed. And you certainly couldn't be next to the altar depressed. So how could the altar cry? You know what he said? He said the altar cries tears of joy that these two people who were suffering so much have now set themselves free to find their lives again. I thought that was a very beautiful insight. The Gemara also goes on and says in Kiddushin, this is just kind of wild stuff, maybe I'll slip over it because I do also have to maintain a face in the community. But Gemara Kiddushin is worth reading, it's really out there. It gets into all sorts of stuff with ex-wives, but we'll leave that, as opposed to X-Files. So the Gemara Baba Basra says, here, again, incredible. Remember, women's lib, of which there's a lot of value. There's a real lot of value to what these people brought to our thinking and so on. But guess what? They weren't the originators. This was Talmudic thinking that we had lost. The Gemara says in sensitivity to a woman's property, the Gemara says in Baba Basra that if a man is merely thinking about divorcing his wife, he can no longer inherit her or benefit from her properties. This is Talmudic prenup. The Gemara Nida goes further. Talmud says that a wife who makes herself no longer available for intimacy with her husband can forfeit her ketubah because it's as if there is no marriage. The Gemara Nida says that pursuing peace between people is a fundamental teaching of the Torah, as such that even a couple that got divorced does not mean there cannot be respect and a rapport between the two of them. Doesn't mean that you have to have a bad guy and a good guy in a divorce. You have two people. That's all you have. And so the Gemara therefore says that Rabbi Yehuda used to refer to his ex-wife as the mother of my children in appreciation for who she was. Now let's go to marriage then. Marriage starts off with, really, we mentioned this earlier, who needs marriage? It seems that the only person who needs marriage is man, not woman. And there could be, potentially, looking at the Meforshim, two reasons why this is. And one of them is because, since a woman risks her life to give birth, you can't ask a woman to risk her life. It's not fair. The other reason is because of the curse with Adam and Chava, that she was cursed that she would long for her husband. There was no need to command, because that would be more intuited by the woman, where the man would be, I saw this really, again, I don't even know if it's funny, but I thought it was like really bad, so I reposted it on my Facebook. But it was a picture of a woman running after a man, and the woman's head was the key from the computer screen that said, Kashav. No, he was wearing escape, and he was running from her, and I forgot what she was. Oh, I blew it. Okay, anyhow. But anyhow, so maybe that's why a man must be commanded, because maybe a man intuitively would not want to be married. However, we know that only a woman is considered as a complete entity, and marriage is not called a fulfillment of a woman, whereas a man is not called a man even, unless he is married. The other thing is, I just want to say here, no, I'm going to step over that just because we're keeping a little eye on the time here. The Gemara of Avodah comes back to what we spoke about before, says that a woman has greater influence over spiritual matters in the home than the man. There's a very famous Gemara, I'm sure you guys are familiar with it, about a very holy man married to a very holy woman. They didn't have children after 10 years, they decided to get divorced. The holy man marries an evil woman, the holy woman marries an evil man, and years later, the husband, the evil husband, has now become a holy man. But the holy man has now become evil because of the influence of the wife in terms of the spiritual power in the home. What is really important, and this I think probably is the essence of tonight's class, and that is, why get married? What is marriage? What is this thing? I mean, obviously from a Talmudic Jewish point of view, what is marriage? And what's really incredible is that the Talmud validates that there are practical reasons to be married. It does not mean, oh, I found my beshert and, fell in love, and that's nice. Might not be real, but it's nice. But the Talmud says that there are other very valid reasons, and one should not make light of these reasons. One could merely be friendship. Just friendship. I know a couple that went out 15 years earlier, liked each other, there was no attraction whatsoever. They then went on tons and tons and tons, 15 years later, of dates, and they re-met, and they said, you know what? Let's get married, because I really like you, and she really liked him, even though, I mean, obviously, if they were unattractive, that's asur, but they were not attracted, but they really liked each other, and they got married, and they're so in love today, because the door for them into the marriage was about friendship. It could also just be about status, and the Talmud doesn't make light of that. It can also be even about having security, or in one's old age, to have somebody to be there. And God forbid, when you're an elderly person, you shouldn't be alone. When you fall, there should be somebody there who's there to help you. These are valid reasons, because a marriage is about a partnership. It's a building relationship. There are three primary give and take in a marriage. Now, one of those three, which is so fascinating, so far ahead of all times, because we're talking thousands of years ago, this was our thinking. One is there's a financial relationship. That a man is obligated to financially, we're not going into the details, financially support his wife. In return, if the wife works, her money goes to him. If she finds a metzia, as we call it, that metzia goes to him. Why? Because he's financing her. But guess what? A woman can turn around and say, keep it. I don't want your money. I got $300,000 Skadden Arb's deal as a lawyer, and you're a Rebbe in Cheder. You know what? You keep that support money, and I'll keep my salary. That does not violate a marriage. In fact, not only does it not violate, but the Gemara actually brings in the Sanhedrin, it talks about cases of where women waive their husband's support in order to be able to keep their own wages. The idea of a working woman and a woman out there as a peer in the working world was completely acceptable in Talmudic time. Just think of where other women, other cultures, inappropriate in those same times, what they were considered. In Talmudic world, it was appropriate. We'll see in another example of what that is. The Gemara Sanhedrin also says, speaking of the financial element for a minute here, the Gemara says here, a little bit more mystical, it says that a person's wife dies from her husband not being able to pay off his loans. In Zvachim, the language is a little different. It says that a man's wife does not die unless they ask her husband to repay stolen goods, and he doesn't have the ability to repay it. The Gemara in Chulin says that the man in the home, this I think is the most beautiful Gemara of all the Gemaras. It says as follows: a man in the home is expected to trust in God. When things go wrong or whatever it is, he is expected to have faith in God. However, his wife and children do not have to have faith in God. They are allowed to have faith in him and demand from him that he comes through. Which means if money is tight in the home and the wife complains to the husband, he may not say to her, trust in God. But he has to go out and take action knowing that God will help him. Women in the workforce. Gemara in Shabbos says that the Talmud says that a woman as leaders would often wear a ring with a signet which they had for signing contracts and documents. And the Gemara in Shavuot says, the Talmud makes it clear that a woman has every right to swear in court to reclaim stolen property on every level parallel. The Gemara in Gittin says that women being in the work world was never seen as demeaning. Moreover, a husband and a wife, as we said before, may agree that she will support herself from her own earnings. And here, the Gemara Psachim goes into it even more in depth. The Gemara says there, discusses the pros and cons of women in the work world. It says that a woman should not waste her time on selling items with small margins of profit. The Talmud, for example, says in selling wool by weight is smarter to sell wool as garments, because the same wool as a garment will have a bigger margin, make more money. And when dealing with real estate, the woman said, and properties, again the advice is that simply hire out space, such as the uses of a mill, which has a small margin, but rather she should be involved in buying and selling fields, which have much higher returns. The idea that a woman would be paid less or earn less than a man because she is a woman is totally alien to Jewish thought. A woman can be as clever and successful in business as any man, if not more. The Gemara in Zvachim says the Talmud discusses the woman's role even in the Beit HaMikdash, and says that in the Beit HaMikdash there were women butchers who were involved in shchita. Because you know the shchita doesn't have to be done by a Kohen, it's done by a Zar. Even women were butchers in the Beit HaMikdash. And the other reason of the idea of marriage is the idea, of course, of love. As we spoke about before, love is something that comes as the result. One last section, Shalom Bayit, and then we'll finish. You know, I said that at the opening of the class, the joke was it's either Shalom Bayit or Shalom Bayit, right? Some other people say it's either Shalom Bayit or Shalom Bayot, right? And of course, this is the whole idea of the Ezer Kenegdo, that this is a seesaw relationship of a balance between each other. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, it quotes positive steps from the writings of Ben Sir, says, a good woman will give to one who fears God, but a bad wife is like leprosy and should be divorced. What does that mean? So this is really appropriate. This is why we're doing the class tonight, because it's appropriate to this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha is all about building a home for God. But in fact, there are three homes that have to be built. One has to be the home we build inside. By the way, if you have a chance on this week's Parsha, I highly recommend you learn the Malbim. The Malbim equates every organ of the body to the different vessels of the Beit HaMikdash. The menorah, the Mizbeach, and so on. So the idea, as the Malbim points out, is that you can build your body, you can build you into a Beit HaMikdash. You can be a home for God. Once you are a home for God, you can now join up with a man or a woman and create another home for God, where everything in your house becomes the, right? We know the Gemara says a person's Shabbos table, that is the shulchan from the Beit HaMikdash, and so on. Those are the kelim in your house, and then of course by doing that we build these homes. Then ultimately we build the ultimate home for God, which is the Beit HaMikdash. The Gemara Bava Metzia, I'm just going to end off with a couple of quotes here, just so that the women walk away as the good guys. Yeah. So the Gemara, and don't take it personal. The Gemara Bava Metzia says, there is no blessing in one's home except through his wife. Honoring one's wife, this is also the Gemara Bava Metzia, brings wealth. But on the other hand, I found another Gemara which I kind of found was kind of cool. And the Gemara says that Rebbe Lazar Reb Shimon, his wife became very frustrated trying to heal her husband and left him to go to his father's house. And so while he's lying there, no money, no wife, no anything, then it says that the minute she left, there was a knock at the door and 60 sailors showed up. Each one of them had 60 servants, and each servant was carrying 60 pouches of money. So I just thought that was kind of funny. After the Gemara just got done saying that one makes their wealth through their wife. There should always be something to eat in the house to preserve Shalom Bayit. The Gemara in Tumura says that as a rule, if there is no food in the house, the wife will scream. To which the Gemara, coming back to Bava Metzia, says that the Talmud warns a man to be very careful not to bring his wife to tears. And the Gemara Bava Basra says, Talmud defines a poor man as a person with a bad wife, and a happy man as one with a good wife. While the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that the Talmud says that the role of all women in society is to bring righteousness into the world. By the way, I'm sure you know that this is the idea of the feminine energy which brings redemption. The first redemption in the world was Aaron, Moshe, Aleph, Mem, Aim, mother. The second redemption in the world was Esther, Mordechai, Aleph, Mem, Aim, mother. The final redemption in the world is Eliyahu, Mashiach, Aleph, Mem, Aim, mother. So women have this power to bring through that righteousness into the world. The Talmud points out that sometimes turning to one's wife with big problems can actually save your life. The Talmud says that the best approach to marriage is to love your wife as much as you love yourself, yet to honor her even more than you honor yourself. And the last thing where we'll stop, the Talmud compares the daughters of Israel to the waves of the sea. So any of you guys are surfers. Okay. So just like the waves are numerous and they make great noise, so are the good deeds of Jewish women because they make great noise in heaven. And here's a beautiful thing I heard from Rebbe Leifer, Zichron Bracha, in Tzfat, when I had that long coat and that funny payas. I was a kid. But he once said to me, you know, in prayer, we say, Rash Gadol, right? And then there came from behind me this great noise. What is the Rash Gadol? The numerical value, the gematria of Rash Gadol, is 613. Because the only sounds that they hear in heaven are not MTV. They are MT, mitzvahs, Torah. That's what they hear. So that's the things we need to focus on. Why bother to get married? Because it's an amazing opportunity to fulfill ourselves. What about getting married? Don't go in there to fulfill, go in there to give. When you go to give, you get. And that's what the Beatles always said. Because in the end, the love you make is equal to the love you give. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.